His son is shot, and there is no hospital around because the zombie apocalypse is here. Hello all, this is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the second episode of the second season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. See the links in the video description for a retelling of the previous episodes. Friends, let's finally reach 100 subscribers, and as soon as this video gets 20 likes, I'm releasing the sequel. Enjoy watching it. Rick is running relentlessly through a field, Carl unresponsive in his arms. Shane follows behind with an overweight hunter, who's struggling to keep up. The man shot Carl, and Shane is abusing him for it. How far? Rick yells, turning back around for only a second, and the hunter breathlessly sends him ahead. Ask for Herschel. Tell him Modus sent you. Rick crosses a tree line and a farmhouse is visible. He quickens his desperate pace. A young woman with a brunette bob sees him running across the field through a pair of binoculars. "Dad," she shouts from the front porch. Rick stops when he reaches the front steps of the farmhouse, staring up at an old man surrounded by his family and begging, "Are you Herschel?" He explains that Herschel's man, Otis, shot his son, and Herschel immediately enlists the help of his daughter, Maggie, and another woman, Patricia, to help save Carl. Otis and Shane finally arrive at the farmhouse, and Otis is beside himself with guilt, while Shane rushes to comfort his stunned best friend, soaked in Carl's blood. Back inside the house, Herschel Green demands to know what happened. "I was tracking a buck," Otis sputters, seeking comfort in Patricia. "I didn't see him until he was on the ground." Herschel asks Carl's blood type and Rick says, "A positive. Same as mine." But Herschel looks no less relieved when he replies, "That's fortunate. Don't wander far. I'm gonna need you." Herschel determines that the bullet broke into pieces in his abdomen and he would likely need to operate to get all of the pieces out. The dire reality of the situation causes Rick to come out of his trance and remember his wife, and he sobs into Shane's shoulder because she doesn't even know that her son's been shot. Meanwhile, as they trudge back to the highway, the others have heard the gunshot in the woods, and no one's more concerned than Lori. "Why was it just one gunshot?" she asks, knowing Rick and Shane wouldn't waste a bullet to take down a single walker. Carol Pelletier agrees that Rick and Shane should have caught up to the group by now, but Daryl Dixon, brandishing his crossbow, calms them down. Andrea offers support to Carol over her daughter Sophia's disappearance, and Carol admits she just keeps thinking she doesn't want her daughter to end up like Amy. She immediately backpedals, apologizing to Andrea about mentioning Amy, but Andrea's already lost, missing her sister all over again. Daryl steps in. "We're gonna find that little girl. She's gonna be just fine." They continue to walk back towards the highway. Dale asks T-Dog how he's feeling with the cut on his arm, now covered with a gauze bandage and some gaffer tape. T-Dog dodges the question, and Dale presses him. Lifting T-Dog's makeshift bandage, Dale notices that he's developing a blood infection. Lightheaded, T-Dog laughs off the old man. "Wouldn't that be the way? World's gone to hell. Dead people risen up to eat the living, and Ole Theodore Douglas gets done in by a cut on his arm." Dale insists that they need to start looking for antibiotics, stunned they've yet to find any with all the cars they have looked through. Tired, T-Dog grudgingly joins in, finding a pack of cigarettes in the glove compartment of a minivan. His eye catches something in the back seat, a blood-covered, empty baby's car seat. Unnerved and with a cigarette dangling from his mouth, he backs away from the vehicle. At the farm, Rick blames himself for what happened to his son as Herschel works to save the boy's life. Rick says, clearly understanding that it was the search for Sophia and saying he could join him and Shane that led to his son being shot. But Shane stands behind him, telling him not to blame himself for everything that happened with Sophia and Carl. He assures Rick that Carl will survive getting shot, just like he did. Maggie calls Rick in and tells him that Carl needs blood. Patricia, who acts as Herschel's nurse, sticks a needle in Rick's arm. Herschel goes into Carl's stomach and Carl screams in agony. Shane holds down Carl and Herschel pulls a bullet fragment out from his wound before Carl passes out from the pain. Herschel states that he has removed one of the fragments, but there are still 5 more that are buried too deep for him to get out without putting Carl under. If Carl moved and screamed like he did the first time when he went deeper, he'd sever an artery, Herschel explains. Rick insists that Lori has to know, but Shane stops him from leaving his son's side to search for her on his own because Carl needs more of Rick's blood. Shane tells him to have the strength of his wife, who kept a bedside vigil for Rick after he was shot months earlier. Herschel tells Rick that Carl will need major surgery to remove the last fragments, but that there was internal bleeding and that they are unequipped at the farm for such a process. He claims that they need a respirator and more equipment to undergo this operation without losing Carl. Herschel explains that these materials are all from the FEMA command post that's set up at the local high school 5 miles from the farm. "The place was overrun last time I saw it," says Otis. Shane's prepared to go on his own, and Rick is guilt-ridden for it, but Otis volunteers to go along to right his mistake. Patricia, his wife, tries to object, but he won't hear it. Maggie, Herschel's eldest daughter, offers to find Lori and the rest of the survivors to tell them what happened. Rick gives Otis his Colt as a secondary weapon before he leaves with Shane for the high school, thanking the man for risking his life to help save his son. Otis's only other gun is the rifle he shot Carl with, and he packs it into the truck sheepishly as he and Shane pile into his pickup truck. Back at the RV, T-Dog, now delirious, tries to convince Dale that the two of them should take the RV and run, believing that the group will be quick to kill them as he sees them as the two weak links. Dale blows him off, but he realizes that T-Dog's infection is getting worse due to an intense fever and continues looking for antibiotics after making T-Dog take some ibuprofen he found to knock the fever down. About 100 yards from the highway on their way back from searching for Sophia, Andrea is attacked by a walker. The group rushes back to help her, but the walker has her pinned to the ground. She's terrified, and she wonders if this is it. A horse gallops out of the bush and Maggie, baseball bat in hand, knocks the walker off Andrea before any damage is done. Maggie tells Lori that Carl was shot and tells her to get on the horse, giving the rest of the group directions to Green Farm. Glenn looks on dumbfounded. Daryl tries to object to her leaving with a stranger, but Lori, stunned by the news, doesn't question it. She jumps on the back of the horse and heads towards the farmhouse with Maggie. Rick admires Herschel's picturesque farm, which Herschel says has been in his family for 160 years. Herschel tries to reassure Rick that the virus is a temporary thing and that a cure will be found, but Rick tries to tell him it's a lot worse than he thinks. Maggie and Lori are seen galloping on the horse towards the house. Lori arrives at the house and breaks down when she sees Carl lying passed out in bed with gauze to cover his wound. After Rick gives his second blood transfusion, Herschel hands him a glass of orange juice and assures him and Lori that he'll have a far better chance of saving Carl if Shane and Otis get back from the high school with the proper equipment. He tells them that he's done the surgery before, but he informs them he's a veterinarian, not a doctor. Lori struggles to accept that this is the best care available for her son. Back at the highway, Andrea won't speak to Dale, who heard her screams in the forest. He's stunned to find out Carl's been shot, but he tells Glenn to take T-Dog to Herschel's farm for medical treatment on his arm, while the others stay behind to wait for Sophia. They decide to rig a sign for Sophia in the morning before they all move to the farm. Daryl, hearing how badly in need of antibiotics T-Dog is, gives him a selection of antibiotics from his brother Merle's stash of drugs, which he left behind at the campsite after cutting off his own hand in Atlanta and fleeing. Shane and Otis arrive at the high school at dusk. They discover that it is still overrun by walkers. They formulate a plan to cross the parking lot and get to the now abandoned FEMA trailer. Shane pops the trunk of an abandoned police cruiser and finds a set of flares. He sets them off, distracting the walkers and enabling them to reach the trailer unharmed. Herschel warns Rick and Lori that Carl's blood pressure keeps dropping, and soon they'll have to decide whether or not to do the surgery without the anesthetic, which has a higher chance of killing him, but he also says that he will die without the surgery. Rick wants to go after Shane and Otis, but Lori commands him to stay for her and Carl's sake. After successfully collecting the necessary equipment from the trailer, Shane and Otis are quickly overrun. They lock themselves inside the school by placing a cotter pin in a sliding gate, which is being shaken loose by an overbearing herd trying to make its way inside.